Book 3, Chapter 7 of the late Mr. Jonathan Wild the Great. This recording is in the public domain. Read by Dennis Sayers. The late Mr. Jonathan Wild the Great by Henry Fielding. Book 3, Chapter 7. Matters preliminary to the marriage between Mr. Jonathan Wild and the chaste Laeticia. But to proceed with our history, Fireblood, having received this letter, and promised on his honour, with many voluntary asseverations, to discharge his embassy faithfully, went to visit the fair Laeticia. The lady, having opened the letter and read it, put on an air of disdain, and told Mr. Fireblood she could not conceive what Mr. Wild meant by troubling her with his impertinence. She begged him to carry the letter back again, saying, had she known from whom it came, she would have been D'd before she had opened it. But with you, young gentleman, says she, I am not in the least angry. I am rather sorry that so pretty a young man should be employed in such an errand. She accompanied these words with so tender an accent and so wanton a leer that Fireblood, who was no backward youth, began to take her by the hand, and proceeded so warmly that, to imitate his actions with the rapidity of our narration, he in a few minutes ravished this fair creature, or at least would have ravished her, if she had not, by a timely compliance, prevented him. Fireblood, after he had ravished as much as he could, returned to Wild, and acquainted him as far as any wise man would with what had passed, concluding with many praises of the young lady's beauty, with whom, he said, if his honour would have permitted him, he should himself have fallen in love, but in him, if he would not sooner be torn to pieces by wild horses than even think of injuring his friend. He asserted, indeed, and swore so heartily, that had not Wild been so thoroughly convinced of the impregnable chastity of the lady, he might have suspected his success. However, he was by these means entirely satisfied of his friend's inclination towards his mistress. Thus constituted were the love affairs of our hero, when his father brought him Mr. Snap's proposal. The reader must know very little of love, or indeed of anything else, if he requires any information concerning the reception which this proposal met with. Not guilty never sounded sweeter in the ears of a prisoner at the bar, nor the sound of a reprieve to one at the gallows, than did every word of the old gentleman in the ears of our hero. He gave his father full power to treat in his name, and desired nothing more than expedition. The old people now met, and Snap, who had information from his daughter of the violent passion of her lover, endeavoured to improve it to the best advantage, and would not have only declined giving her any fortune himself, but have attempted to cheat her of what she owed to the liberality of her relations, particularly of a pint silver caudle cup, the gift of her grandmother. However, in this the young lady herself afterwards took care to prevent him. As to the old Mr. Wild, he did not sufficiently attend to all the designs of Snap, as his faculties were busily employed in designs of his own, to overreach, or, as others express it, to cheat, the said Mr. Snap, by pretending to give his son a whole number for a chair, when in reality he was entitled to a third only. While matters were thus settling between the old folks, the young lady agreed to admit Mr. Wild's visits, and by degrees began to entertain him with all the show of affection which the great natural reserve of her temper and the greater artificial reserve of her education would permit. At length, everything being agreed between their parents, settlements made, and the lady's fortune, to wit, £17 and 9 shillings in money and goods, paid down, the day for their nuptials was fixed, and they were celebrated accordingly. Most private histories, as well as comedies, end at this period, the historian and the poet both concluding they have done enough for their hero when they have married him, or intimating rather that the rest of his life must be a dull calm of happiness, very delightful indeed to pass through, but somewhat insipid to relate, and matrimony in general must, I believe, without any dispute, be allowed to be this state of tranquil felicity, including so little variety that, like Salisbury Plain, it affords only one prospect, a very pleasant one, it must be confessed, but the same. Now, there was all the probability imaginable that this contract would have proved of such happy note, both from the great accomplishments of the young lady, who was thought to be possessed of every qualification necessary to make the marriage state happy, and from the truly ardent passion of Mr. Wild. But whether it was that nature and fortune had great designs for him to execute, and would not suffer his vast abilities to be lost and sunk in the arms of a wife, or whether neither nature nor fortune has any hand in the matter, is a point I will not determine. Certain it is that this match did not produce that serene state which we have mentioned above, but resembled the most turbulent and ruffled rather than the most calm sea. I cannot here omit a conjecture, ingenious enough, of a friend of mine who had a long intimacy in the Wild family. He hath often told me he fancied one reason of the dissatisfactions which afterwards fell out between Wild and his lady arose from the number of gallants to whom she had, before marriage, granted favours. For, says he, and indeed very probable it is too, the lady might expect from her husband what she had before received from several, and being angry not to find one man as good as 10, she had from that indignation taken those steps which we cannot perfectly justify. From this person I received the following dialogue, which he assured me he had overheard and taken down verbatim. It passed on the day fortnight after they were married. End of Book 3, Chapter 7. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California for LibriVox.